Little girl arrives at school, crying. Teacher looks at her lips and calls 911 in panic. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Pine Hollow wasn't a place that made the headlines. A small town with faded storefronts and quiet streets. It had seen better days before the factory closures. But to Ms. Rebecca Carter, it was home, and her second-grade classroom at Pine Hollow Elementary was her pride and joy. Rebecca stood at the classroom door that Tuesday morning in November, greeting each of her students with a warm smile. The autumn air carried a chill, and most children hurried in with rosy cheeks and excited chatter about the upcoming Thanksgiving pageant. "Good morning, Tyler. I like your new backpack," she said to a freckle-faced boy who beamed at the recognition. "Hello, Sophia. Did you finish that book we talked about?" Her classroom was a haven she had carefully created, walls covered with colorful artwork, reading corners with plush pillows, and positive affirmations hanging from the ceiling. 20 years of teaching had taught Rebecca that for some children, school was the safest place they knew. As the bell rang, Rebecca noticed one empty desk. Ellie Monroe was late again. The quiet 6-year-old had transferred to Pine Hollow Elementary just 2 months ago, and Rebecca had been trying her best to help the child adjust. There was something about Ellie's reserved demeanor that tugged at Rebecca's heart. Just as Rebecca was about to close the door, a small figure appeared in the hallway. Ellie Monroe shuffled toward the classroom, head down, wearing the same faded blue sweater she'd worn all week. It hung loosely on her thin frame, sleeves stretched and worn at the edges. "Good morning, Ellie," Rebecca said gently. But when the child looked up, Rebecca's smile froze. Tears streamed down Ellie's pale cheeks. Her lips were cracked and swollen, with small, open sores at the corners. When she tried to speak, her mouth trembled with pain. "Oh, sweetheart," Rebecca whispered, kneeling down to eye level. "What happened to your lips?" The other children had already started their morning worksheet, allowing Rebecca a moment of privacy with Ellie in the doorway. She noticed more details now. The dark circles under Ellie's eyes, her unwashed hair, the way her small hands trembled slightly. Ellie's voice was barely audible when she finally spoke. "He said it wouldn't hurt if I stayed quiet." A chill ran through Rebecca. In 20 years of teaching, she'd developed an instinct about these things. Something wasn't right. "Who said that, Ellie?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. But Ellie just shook her head, fresh tears welling up. When she tried to say more, her cracked lips started bleeding. "It's okay. You don't have to talk right now," Rebecca assured her. She glanced back at her classroom, making a split-second decision. "Ms. Johnson," she called to the teaching assistant who was helping students with their work, "could you watch the class for a moment?" Rebecca gently guided Ellie toward the nurse's office, her mind racing. The child's physical condition was concerning enough, but those words, "He said it. Wouldn't hurt if I stayed quiet," echoed in her thoughts. As they walked slowly down the hallway, Rebecca noticed how Ellie clutched her backpack tightly against her chest, like a shield. When they passed the cafeteria, the smell of breakfast caused Ellie's stomach to growl audibly, yet the child showed no interest in the food. In that moment, Rebecca Carter made a promise to herself. Whatever was happening to Ellie Monroe, she wouldn't look away. She wouldn't be another adult who failed to see what was right in front of her. Rebecca didn't know it yet, but that promise would change both their lives forever. The school nurse's office was quiet except for the gentle hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Nurse Helen Jenkins, a kind woman with salt and pepper hair and 30 years of experience, examined Ellie's lips with careful hands. "These are severely dehydrated, sweetheart," she said, her voice professional yet gentle. "And you're quite underweight for your age." Rebecca stood nearby, her concern growing as the nurse continued her examination. When Helen checked Ellie's temperature, the thermometer showed a slight fever. The child's fingernails were brittle, her skin dry despite the autumn humidity. "I'll call her emergency contact," Helen said quietly to Rebecca. stepping away from Ellie, who sat hunched on the examination table, small legs dangling. "I've been noticing things," Rebecca whispered, following the nurse to her desk. "She's always tired. Her clothes, don't fit properly. And she never eats lunch. She wraps it up and puts it in her backpack." Helen nodded grimly. Classic signs of food insecurity, but these lips... She glanced back at Ellie. "This level of dehydration and malnutrition requires medical attention." As Helen dialed the number on Ellie's emergency contact form, Rebecca returned to the child's side. She noticed how Ellie's eyes darted nervously around the room, how she flinched slightly when Rebecca sat beside her. "It's going to be okay," Rebecca assured her, though she wasn't certain that was true. The nurse's conversation drifted over. "Mr. Monroe, this is Nurse Jenkins from Pine Hollow Elementary. Yes, regarding Ellie, she's not well. Significant dehydration and possible malnutrition. Yes, I understand you're her uncle. It would be best if she sees a doctor today." Rebecca watched Ellie's reaction to hearing her uncle mentioned. The child's shoulders tensed, but her expression remained unreadable. "Ellie," Rebecca said softly, "is there anything you want to tell me about what's happening at home?" Ellie remained silent, staring at her worn sneakers. One had a hole near the big toe, Rebecca noticed. The nurse returned, her expression troubled. "Her Uncle Gerald says he'll be here in 20 minutes. He sounded overwhelmed." As they waited, Rebecca tried different approaches to connect with Ellie. She asked about favorite books, colors, activities, anything to establish trust. Ellie gave minimal responses, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, as Rebecca mentioned the upcoming music class, something changed in Ellie's demeanor. A small spark lit in her eyes. "Do you like music, Ellie?" Rebecca asked, noticing the shift. Ellie nodded slightly. "Mom used to sing," she whispered, then immediately looked down as if she'd said too much. "Your mother has a nice voice?" Rebecca gently probed. "She's sick," Ellie murmured. "That's why I live with Uncle Gerald now." Before Rebecca could ask more, the office door opened. A man in his mid-30s entered, his clothes wrinkled and his face unshaven. Dark circles under his eyes matched Ellie's. "This must be Gerald Monroe." "I came as quick as I could," he said, slightly out of breath. "What's wrong with Ellie?" As Helen explained Ellie's condition, Rebecca observed the interaction between uncle and niece. Gerald seemed genuinely concerned, yet there was an awkwardness to how he stood near Ellie, as if unsure how to comfort her. "I've been trying my best," he said defensively when Helen suggested immediate medical attention. "It's been hard since my sister—" He stopped, glancing at Ellie. "It's complicated." Rebecca introduced herself. "I'm Ellie's teacher, Ms. Carter. I've noticed she's been struggling recently." Gerald ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "We're going through a rough patch, that's all. I just got laid off from the mill, and Sarah, my sister, she had to be hospitalized a few months back. It's temporary." As they spoke, another teacher appeared at the door, leaning in to speak quietly to Rebecca. "That family's had it rough," she whispered. "I heard her mother was quite secretive, mentioned once that Ellie's father couldn't know where they were living." Rebecca felt a chill at these words but maintained her composure, as Gerald agreed to take Ellie to the urgent care clinic. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca knelt beside Ellie. "I'll see you tomorrow, okay? And we'll have music class." For the first time, a ghost of a smile appeared on Ellie's cracked lips. As Gerald led her away, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that what she'd glimpsed today was merely the surface of a much deeper story, one that Ellie Monroe carried silently on her small shoulders. Rebecca couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ellie's cracked lips and haunted expression. Around midnight, she found herself at her desk, looking through old photographs, pausing at one of herself and her younger sister Emma, who had passed away from leukemia 20 years ago. Emma had been just 7, with the same quiet resilience Rebecca now saw in Ellie. "I couldn't help you then," she whispered to the photograph. But maybe I can help her now. The next morning, Rebecca arrived at school early, determined to check on Ellie's situation. Principal Warren was already in his office, coffee in hand. I need to talk about Ellie Monroe, Rebecca began, explaining. Yesterday's events. The principal sighed. I understand your concern, Rebecca, but there are channels for these things. Did you file a report with social services? I called yesterday afternoon. They said they'd add it to the queue. Her frustration was evident. They're overwhelmed and understaffed. That's unfortunate, but it's not within your job description to what? Care? Rebecca rarely challenged authority, but this felt different. With all due respect, sir, if we don't advocate for these children, who will? Principal Warren looked at her thoughtfully. Just be careful. These situations can be more complicated than they appear. When Ellie didn't come to school that day, Rebecca's worry deepened. She called the office number Gerald had provided, but only reached an automated message saying the voicemail was full. After school, Rebecca made an impulsive decision. She had Gerald's address from Ellie's records, an apartment in the older part of town. It wasn't strictly professional to visit, but she couldn't shake her concern. The Pine Acres apartments had seen better days, paint peeled from the walls, and the stairwell smelled of damp and neglect. Rebecca found apartment 3C and knocked hesitantly. Gerald opened the door, surprise crossing his tired face. Ms. Carter? I hope I'm not intruding, Rebecca said. Ellie wasn't in school today, and I wanted to check how she's doing. Gerald hesitated, then stepped back. She's resting. The doctor gave her some medicine for her lips and said she needs fluids and better nutrition. His voice lowered. And vitamins, lots of vitamins. The apartment was small but clean, though sparsely furnished. Rebecca noticed a makeshift bed of blankets in the corner of the living room. No toys were visible. No children's books. None of the usual signs of a child's presence. It's temporary, Gerald said, following her gaze. I'm on a waiting list for a 2-bedroom. How's your job search going? Rebecca asked gently. Gerald's shoulders slumped. Not great. The mill closing hit everyone hard. I've got an interview at the hardware store next week, but it's minimum wage. Rebecca noticed a photograph on the wall. A younger Gerald with a woman who must be Ellie's mother. They were smiling, arms around each other. Sarah, Gerald said, noticing her interest. Before everything changed. Is anything I can do to help? Rebecca asked. Gerald looked embarrassed. We're managing. The clinic gave us some sample supplements for Ellie, and there's a food bank on Thursdays. As they talked, a door opened, and Ellie appeared, wrapped in a blanket too large for her small frame. Her lips looked better, coated with medicated ointment, but her eyes still held that same wariness. Hi, Ellie, Rebecca said warmly. I missed you in class today. Ellie nodded but didn't speak. Ms. Carter came to check on you, Gerald explained. Wasn't that nice? We have music class tomorrow, Rebecca said. Maybe you'll feel well enough to come? A flicker of interest crossed Ellie's face, but she remained by the doorway, one hand clutching her blanket tightly. As Rebecca prepared to leave, she noticed a business card on the counter for Pine Hollow Community Services. Have you spoken with Mrs. Darlene Wilson? She asked. She runs the family support program there. Gerald shook his head. Another wait list, probably. Let me call her, Rebecca offered. She might be able to help right away. She's been known to work miracles. As Rebecca left the apartment building, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Darlene, it's Rebecca Carter. I need your help with something important. 2 days later, Ellie returned to school. Her lips were healing, and she had a new backpack, a donation from the community center. But Rebecca noticed she still hoarded her lunch, wrapping half of her sandwich carefully in a napkin. Why do you save your food, Ellie? Rebecca asked gently during lunch period. Ellie looked down at her lap. Sometimes there's nothing at home, she whispered. Uncle Gerald tries, but Rebecca's heart tightened. You know what? I always pack too much lunch. Myself. Would it be okay if I shared my extras with you to take home sometimes? Ellie looked up, surprise and caution battling in her expression. After a long moment, she nodded. It was a small first step, but Rebecca knew from experience that sometimes small steps were the beginning of greater journeys. What she didn't know yet was just how difficult this particular journey would become for both of them. The following week brought small improvements in Ellie's condition. The medicated ointment had healed her lips, and thanks to Mrs. Darlene Wilson's intervention, Gerald and Ellie now received weekly grocery deliveries from the community center. Rebecca noticed Ellie had more energy, though the child remained guarded and quiet. Thursday morning started like any other. Children hung up their coats and settled into their desks, morning chatter filling the classroom. Rebecca watched. Ellie slipped quietly to her seat, wearing a sweater that was slightly less worn than her usual one. Another donation from Mrs. Darlene's program. Today we'll be drawing our families, Rebecca announced after attendance. She moved around the classroom, distributing paper and colored pencils. Draw the, people who are important to you. The children eagerly began sketching stick figures with exaggerated smiles and houses with curling chimney smoke. Rebecca walked between the desks, offering encouragement and answering questions. When she reached Ellie's desk, she found the girl staring at her blank. Paper, pencil untouched. It's okay to start with just one person, Rebecca suggested gently. Ellie nodded and carefully began to draw. Rebecca moved on, helping other students but kept glancing back. Ellie worked with intense concentration, her small hand gripping the pencil tightly. As the activity concluded, Rebecca asked volunteers to share their drawings. Several children eagerly held up pictures of large families with pets and grandparents. Ellie, would you like to share yours? Rebecca asked, noticing the girl had completed her drawing. Ellie hesitated, then slowly raised her paper. Her artwork was different from the others, more detailed, less colorful. She had drawn 3 separate houses. In the first stood 3 figures, a woman, a small girl, and a tall, shadowy figure with no distinct facial features. In the second house were just the woman and girl. The third house, showed the girl with a man Rebecca recognized as Gerald. Before Rebecca could comment, Tyler, a boy with a normally kind disposition, pointed at Ellie's drawing. Why are the houses all different? And why does that person not have a face? Several children giggled. Another called out, and why are your clothes always so old and dirty? Smelly Ellie, someone whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Rebecca intervened immediately. That's enough. We treat each other with kindness in this classroom. But the damage was done. Ellie's face had gone pale, her eyes wide with hurt. She quickly folded her drawing and slipped it into her desk. I think we need to talk about respect, Rebecca said firmly, turning the incident into an impromptu lesson on kindness. But as she spoke, she watched Ellie shrink into herself, becoming almost invisible in her seat. Later, during recess, Rebecca found Ellie sitting alone on a bench instead of playing. I'm sorry about what happened earlier, Rebecca said, sitting beside her. Ellie shrugged, eyes fixed on the ground. It's okay. I'm used to it. Those 4 words, I'm used to it, broke Rebecca's heart more than tears would have. No child should be used to unkindness, Rebecca said. Would you like to tell me about your drawing? The 3 houses? Ellie was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought she wouldn't answer, then barely audible. We moved a lot. With your mom? A nod. And the person without a face in the first house? Ellie's body tensed. I don't want to talk about him. After recess, as the children worked on math problems, Rebecca noticed Ellie suddenly look toward the window, her pencil dropping from her hand. Following her gaze, Rebecca saw nothing unusual, just the school parking lot and the street beyond. Ellie, is something wrong? The girl shook her head quickly, but her hands trembled as she picked up her pencil. After school, as Rebecca prepared to leave, she decided to check Ellie's desk, something she rarely did, respecting her students' privacy. But concern overrode protocol. Inside, she found the folded drawing from earlier, but Ellie had added to it. The shadowy figure in the first house now had long arms that stretched toward the mother and child. And on the back was another drawing, a small figure hiding under what looked like a bed, with the words, "Stay quiet," scrawled in a child's handwriting. Rebecca carefully returned the drawing to the desk, her mind racing. As she left the school, she noticed a car she didn't recognize parked across the street, a dark sedan with tinted windows. Something about it made her uneasy. That evening, Rebecca called Mrs. Darlene to update her on Ellie's situation. "The drawing concerns me," Rebecca explained, "and something she said about moving frequently. Her mother was apparently very secretive." "Some families have good reasons to keep moving," Mrs. Darlene replied, her voice heavy with implication. "I've seen it before. Have you been able to contact the mother directly?" "Gerald says she's in a treatment facility for mental health issues. He's vague about details." "I'll see what I can find out," Mrs. Darlene promised. "In the meantime, keep being that safe person for Ellie. Children who've learned not to trust need time to unlearn that lesson." After hanging up, Rebecca couldn't shake the image of Ellie's drawing, the faceless figure with long, reaching arms, and a child hiding, staying quiet in the shadows. Music class had become Ellie's favorite part of the week. Mr. Jameson, the music teacher, had noticed her interest in the old upright piano in the corner of his classroom, and often let her stay a few minutes after class to press the keys. Today, as other students filed out, he showed her a simple pattern of notes. "This is called a C major scale," he explained, demonstrating slowly. "Would you like to try?" Ellie nodded, her small fingers hovering over the keys before carefully repeating the pattern. The notes rang clear and true. Mr. Jameson exchanged a surprised glance with Rebecca, who was waiting by the door. "She has a natural ear," he said quietly. "Some children just do." Rebecca watched Ellie's face as she played the scale again. For those brief moments, the wariness vanished, replaced by concentration and something that almost resembled joy. "Ellie," Rebecca said as they walked back to the classroom, "would you like to learn more piano? Mr. Jameson could give you some extra time." Ellie looked up, hope flickering across her face. "Could I? Uncle Gerald doesn't have a piano." "We can work something out," Rebecca promised. "Maybe you could stay after school some days." For the first time, Ellie smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. That afternoon, Principal Warren called Rebecca into his office. His expression was serious as she took a seat. "There's been a development with Ellie Monroe," he said. "Social services contacted us this morning. They've located another relative." Rebecca sat up straighter. "Another relative? Who?" "Ellie's maternal grandmother, Irene Blackwood. She lives in Madison, about 2 hours from here." "Is that good news?" Rebecca asked cautiously. Principal Warren's frown deepened. "That's unclear. The background check raised some concerns. Mrs. Blackwood has her own history with social services. Apparently, Ellie's mother, Sarah, left home at 16 and rarely maintained contact." Rebecca processed this information. "So what happens now?" "They're still investigating whether Mrs. Blackwood would be a suitable guardian. In the meantime, Ellie stays with her uncle." As Rebecca left the office, her mind whirled with questions. Why? Had Sarah cut ties with her mother? Was it connected to why she and Ellie had moved so frequently? At the end of the school day, Rebecca was surprised to see Mrs. Darlene waiting in the parking lot, her silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. "I thought I'd give Ellie and Gerald a ride home." "Today," she explained. "Gerald's having car trouble again." As they waited for the dismissal bell, Mrs. Darlene lowered her voice. "I've been making some inquiries about Sarah Monroe. The mental health facility she's in is Lakeside Behavioral Health. It's a good place, but she's there under court. Order after a breakdown 3 months ago." "What kind of breakdown?" Rebecca asked. "The details are confidential, but a nurse I know mentioned severe paranoia and anxiety. Sarah was convinced someone was going to take Ellie away." The dismissal bell rang, and children streamed out of the building. Rebecca spotted Ellie immediately, walking alone as usual. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Darlene said quickly. Sarah was admitted under a different last name, Bennett, not Monroe. It might be nothing, but… Rebecca's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. The number was unfamiliar. Hello. Ms. Carter speaking. Ms. Rebecca Carter? A man's voice asked. I'm conducting a family search and was told you might have information about Eleanor Monroe. Rebecca froze. Who is this? I represent interested parties trying to locate family members. It's a private matter. I can't discuss any. Students without proper authorization, Rebecca replied, alarm bells ringing in her mind. If you're from social services, you should contact our principal. This isn't a social services matter, the man said, his tone shifting slightly. But thank you for confirming she attends your school. The call ended abruptly. Rebecca stared at her phone, a chill running down her spine. Who was that? Mrs. Darlene asked, noticing her expression. Someone asking about Ellie, Rebecca replied, scanning the schoolyard. Her eyes landed on a dark sedan parked across the street, the same one she had noticed before. This time she could make out a silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. Ellie approached them, backpack clutched to her chest as usual. Hello, sweetheart, Mrs. Darlene greeted her warmly. I thought I'd give you and your uncle a ride home today. As Ellie climbed into Mrs. Darlene's car, she suddenly froze, her gaze fixed on the dark sedan across the street. Ellie, what's wrong? Rebecca asked. The girl shook her head, but her face had gone pale. Nothing, she whispered, but her hands trembled as she buckled her seatbelt. As Mrs. Darlene's car pulled away, Rebecca watched the dark sedan. It remained parked, but she couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was inside was watching them leave. That evening, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop screen. She had searched for information about Sarah Monroe or Sarah Bennett, finding little beyond a few old social media profiles that had been dormant for years. One photo showed a younger Sarah with a baby, presumably Ellie, her expression a mixture of joy and what Rebecca now recognized as fear. Who was the mysterious caller? Why had Ellie reacted so strongly to the car across the street? And, most troublingly, who was the faceless figure in Ellie's drawing, the one with arms reaching out for her? The community center buzzed with activity on Saturday morning. Volunteers sorted donated clothing, while others prepared food packages for families in need. Rebecca had offered to help, but her real purpose was to speak with Gerald Monroe, who Mrs. Darlene had convinced to attend a job skills workshop. She found him in the computer lab, staring intently at a resume template. His face looked less haggard than when she'd first met him, though worry lines still creased his forehead. Ms. Carter, he greeted her with surprise. I didn't know you volunteered here. Occasionally, Rebecca replied, sitting beside him. How's the job search coming along? Gerald sighed. Slow, but this workshop is helpful. I've been out of the workforce so long everything's changed. And how's Ellie? Doing at home? A shadow crossed Gerald's face. Better, I think. The food deliveries have made a difference. She's even playing with that toy piano Mrs. Darlene brought over. Rebecca nodded, choosing her next words carefully. Gerald, I need to ask you something important. Someone called me asking. Questions about Ellie, a man claiming to be conducting a family search. Do you know anything about that? Gerald's hands froze over the keyboard. What did you tell him? Nothing. But Ellie seemed frightened when she saw a car watching the school yesterday. Gerald closed his eyes briefly, his shoulders sagging. I was hoping we'd have more time. More time for what? Rebecca asked, keeping her voice gentle despite her growing concern. Gerald glanced around to ensure no one was listening. It's complicated. Sarah, my sister, she left Ellie's father 3 years ago. It wasn't a good situation. Was he? Rebecca hesitated, mindful of speaking plainly in a public place. He never laid a hand on Ellie, Gerald said quickly. But Sarah was different, afraid all the time. She said he controlled everything, where she went, who she talked to, every penny they spent. His voice lowered. He'd tell her she was worthless, Crazy. That no one would believe her if she ever spoke up. By the time she left, she was a shell of herself. And he's been looking for them? Gerald nodded grimly. He's wealthy, connected, has friends in law enforcement. Sarah and Ellie moved 5 times. In 2 years. Each time he'd somehow find them. He ran a hand through his hair. When Sarah had her breakdown, I was the only family left who could take Ellie. I thought maybe he'd stopped looking. Rebecca remembered the mysterious caller, the watching car. I don't think he has. What do I do? Gerald asked, real fear in his eyes. I'm barely keeping my head above water as it is. I can't protect them if he comes. Before Rebecca could respond, Mrs. Darlene appeared, Ellie trailing behind her with an armful of children's books, donations from the center's library. Look what Ellie's picked. Out, Mrs. Darlene said cheerfully, seemingly unaware of the tense conversation she'd interrupted. Ellie's eyes moved between Rebecca and her uncle, her perceptive gaze catching the serious expressions they hadn't fully masked. Is something wrong? She asked quietly. No, sweetheart, Gerald said, forcing a smile. Miss Carter was just helping me with job applications. Ellie didn't look convinced. She clutched the books tighter, her knuckles turning white. Ellie helped sort books for an hour, Mrs. Darlene said, gently patting the girl's shoulder. She's quite the organizer. Thank you for the books, Ellie said softly, the politeness clearly ingrained but genuine. As Mrs. Darlene led Ellie to another activity, Gerald turned back to Rebecca, his voice urgent but low. I told her when things got bad, to stay quiet, not to make him angry. I thought I was helping her cope. His expression crumpled with guilt. I didn't know what else to say. I'm not good at this, being a parent. Sarah was always the strong one, even with everything she faced. Rebecca felt a rush of compassion for this man, so clearly out of his depth but trying his best. You're doing better than you think, she assured him. But we need to make sure Ellie stays safe if her father is looking for her. He is, Gerald interrupted. I got a letter yesterday from his lawyer. He's filing for custody. Rebecca's stomach dropped. On what grounds? Claiming I'm an unfit guardian due to my employment, situation and housing, and that Sarah is mentally incompetent. His voice broke. The worst part is he might win. He has money for good lawyers. We don't. A commotion from across the room drew their attention. A child had knocked over a display, and in the noise and sudden movement, Ellie had disappeared under a table, hands covering her ears, eyes squeezed shut. Rebecca hurried over, kneeling to eye level with the frightened child. It's okay, Ellie, she said softly. Just a little accident. No one's angry. Ellie's eyes opened slowly, darting around to confirm Rebecca's words. The fear in them was unmistakable. Not just a startled reaction, but a deeper dread. I didn't mean to hide, she whispered. It was so loud. It's perfectly okay to find a quiet spot when things get too noisy, Rebecca assured her. As Ellie cautiously emerged from under the table, Rebecca noticed a man standing by the center's entrance, watching them. He wore a suit that looked expensive even at a distance, his posture radiating confidence and authority. When he saw Rebecca notice him, he turned and walked out the door. Gerald, Rebecca called urgently. We need to go, now. Outside the community, center window, the dark sedan waited, its engine running. Monday morning brought heavy rain that drummed against the classroom windows, creating a cozy atmosphere despite the dreary weather outside. Rebecca had arrived early, spending time reviewing Ellie's previous school records that Mrs. Darlene had helped her obtain through official channels. The pattern was clear and troubling. 5 schools in 3 years, each transfer occurring mid-year with minimal notice. Comments from previous teachers noted Ellie's academic potential, alongside concerns about her withdrawn behavior and frequent absences. One report mentioned Ellie becoming extremely distressed during a Father's Day card activity. Rebecca closed the folder as her students began arriving, shaking off umbrellas and hanging wet raincoats. Ellie came in with Gerald today, not her usual school bus. The uncle gave Rebecca a meaningful glance before departing, They had agreed to be extra vigilant after Saturday's encounter. "Good morning, Ellie," Rebecca smiled. "I love your new rain boots." Ellie looked down at her yellow boots, another donation from the community center, and offered a small smile in return. "They don't leak," she said, as if this were a remarkable feature. The morning proceeded normally until the class visited the library. As the children scattered to find books, the librarian, Mrs. Peterson, approached Rebecca. "Someone was asking about student records yesterday," she said quietly. "A well-dressed man claiming to be from the district office. He specifically asked about transfer students." Rebecca's pulse quickened. "Did you show him anything?" "Of course not." Mrs. Peterson looked offended. "I told him all requests need to go through Principal Warren with proper identification." She lowered her voice further. "He seemed particularly interested in knowing about a recent transfer from out of state. I didn't like his manner. Too smooth." Rebecca thanked her for the warning and moved through the library, keeping Ellie in her sightline. The girl had found a quiet corner and was absorbed in a picture book about a family of rabbits. At lunchtime, Rebecca noticed Ellie still wrapping up half her sandwich, despite the improvements in her home situation. "Are you saving that for later?" Rebecca asked gently. Ellie nodded. "Just in case." "In case of what, sweetheart?" Ellie looked down at her lap. "In case we have to leave quickly again." The simple statement, delivered so matter-of-factly from a 6-year-old, made Rebecca's heart ache. Before she could respond, a loud crash came from the cafeteria kitchen. A tray had fallen, sending plates clattering to the floor. The sudden noise made most children turn curiously, but Ellie's reaction was different. She immediately slid under the table, knees pulled to her chest, hands over her ears. The same position Rebecca had seen at the community center. Rebecca knelt beside the table. "It's just some dropped dishes, Ellie. Everything's okay." After a moment, Ellie nodded and slowly emerged, cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she noticed other children watching. "Why'd you hide like a baby?" Tyler asked, not unkindly, just curious. "I don't like loud noises," Ellie mumbled. "My dog's the same way," another child offered. "He hides under the bed during thunderstorms." The conversation moved on, but Rebecca made a mental note of Ellie's extreme startle response. It was another piece of the puzzle that was Ellie Monroe's life. After school, Rebecca was surprised to find Frank Williams, Mrs. Darlene's brother, and a retired police officer, waiting in her classroom. "Darlene asked me to stop by," he explained. "Thought you might want to know what I found out." Rebecca closed the classroom door. "About Ellie's situation?" Frank nodded, his weathered face serious. "I still have contacts in law enforcement. The man you saw at the community center is almost certainly James Bennett, Ellie's father. He's a corporate attorney with Carson and Merrick in Chicago, very prestigious firm." "Bennett, not Monroe," Rebecca noted. "That explains the name discrepancy in Sarah's medical records. Sarah's maiden name is Monroe. She went back to it after leaving him," Frank continued. "There's no criminal record for Bennett, but that doesn't mean much. Domestic situations are complicated, especially when the person has resources." "What about the custody filing Gerald mentioned?" "It's real. Bennett has filed for emergency custody, claiming Gerald is an unfit guardian due to financial instability and inadequate housing." Frank's expression darkened. "He's also using Sarah's psychiatric hospitalization against her, painting her as permanently unstable and paranoid." "Is she?" Rebecca asked. "Paranoid, I mean?" Frank considered the question. "Hard to say. Being genuinely afraid and being paranoid can look the same from the outside. If Bennett is as controlling as Gerald describes, Sarah's fear could be entirely rational." Rebecca thought of Ellie hiding under the table, saving food, just in case. Her reaction to loud noises. "What about Ellie? Has she ever said anything specific about her father?" Frank shook his head. "Children her age often can't articulate complex situations, but their behaviors tell stories their words can't yet express." As if on cue, there was a soft knock at the classroom door. Mrs. Darlene entered with Ellie. who was scheduled for her after-school piano time with Mr. Jameson. "Look who I found waiting by the music room," Mrs. Darlene said cheerfully. Ellie's eyes widened slightly at seeing Frank, a stranger in the classroom. She instinctively moved closer. To Mrs. Darlene. "This is my brother Frank," Mrs. Darlene explained. "He used to be a police officer before he retired." At the word police, Ellie's posture changed subtly, a slight straightening of her small shoulders. "Do police officers help people?" she asked in a small voice. Frank knelt to her level, his large frame somehow less intimidating as he smiled gently. "That's our job, yes, to help people who need it." Ellie seemed to consider this carefully before asking, "Even if the bad person says they're not bad?" The adults exchanged glances, recognizing the weight behind this seemingly simple question. "Especially then," Frank replied seriously. "Sometimes the people who say they're not bad are the ones we need to watch most carefully." Ellie nodded, as if this confirmed something she already knew. Then, with the resilience of childhood, she brightened. "Can I go to piano now?" As Mrs. Darlene led Ellie to the music room, Frank turned to Rebecca, his expression grave. "That child has seen things she shouldn't have had to see," he said quietly, "and whatever's coming next, we need to be ready." Outside the school, raindrops continued to drum against the windows, and somewhere in the distance thunder rumbled, a storm approaching. The piano notes drifted down the hallway, simple but clear. "Mary Had a Little Lamb," played slowly but without mistakes. Rebecca paused outside the music room, listening to Mr. Jameson's gentle encouragement and Ellie's careful playing. "Try it once more, but this time feel the rhythm in your heart," Mr. Jameson suggested. The melody began again, slightly more confident. Rebecca peeked through the door's window. Ellie sat at the piano, her posture perfect despite her small size, eyes focused on the keys with an intensity that transformed her usually guarded expression. "Excellent," Mr. Jameson clapped when she finished. "You have a natural gift, Ellie. Have you ever played before?" Ellie shook her head. "Mom used to play sometimes, at our church, before." She trailed off, then added, "I wasn't allowed to touch the piano at home." Rebecca felt rather than saw someone approach and turned to find Principal Warren beside her. "A word in my office, please," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. In his office, Principal Warren closed the door firmly. "I've received a concerning phone call from a James Bennett, who claims to be Ellie Monroe's father." Rebecca kept her expression neutral. "Oh? He says he has legal custody of Ellie and that she was wrongfully taken by her mother. He also expressed concern that school staff, you specifically, are interfering in a family matter." The principal leaned forward. "He mentioned a restraining order against the mother that we were never informed about." "With all due respect, sir," Rebecca responded carefully, "Gerald Monroe is Ellie's legal guardian at present, according to our records. If Mr. Bennett has documentation proving otherwise, he should provide it through proper channels." Principal Warren sighed. "That's what I told him, but he was insistent. Said his lawyer would be contacting us." He studied Rebecca's face. "You knew about this situation, didn't you?" "I knew Ellie's background was complicated," Rebecca admitted. "As her teacher, I'm concerned about her well-being. Your concern is admirable, but there are boundaries, Rebecca. We're educators, not social workers or family courts." His tone softened slightly. "I understand wanting to help, but be careful not to become too personally involved." As Rebecca left the office, those words echoed in her mind. Too personally involved, perhaps she was. But seeing Ellie slowly emerge from her shell over the past weeks, watching her find joy in music, how could she step back now? The following day brought unexpected sunshine after a week of rain. At recess, Rebecca noticed something she'd never seen before. Ellie playing with another child. Zoe Chen, a quiet girl who rarely participated in the rowdier playground games, had approached Ellie with a jump rope, and now they were taking turns, counting jumps together. 1, 2, 3. Zoe counted as Ellie jumped, her face scrunched in concentration. 7, Ellie exclaimed as she stumbled, actually laughing as the rope caught her feet. Rebecca felt a presence beside her and turned to find Mrs. Wilson watching the scene with a similar expression of cautious hope. Small victories, Mrs. Darlene murmured. They matter most. What brings you to school today? Rebecca asked. Gerald had his job interview at the hardware store. I offered to pick Ellie up afterward so he could complete the paperwork if it goes well. She paused. And Frank wanted me to tell you he's been looking into James Bennett more thoroughly. Did he find anything? Mrs. Darlene's expression turned serious. Nothing concrete yet, but there's a pattern. Bennett's first wife also had mental health challenges toward the end of their marriage. She lost custody of their son completely. Rebecca frowned. That could be coincidence. It could, Mrs. Darlene acknowledged. Or it could be that Bennett has a type, vulnerable women he can control, then discredit when they try to leave. She watched Ellie jump rope, her expression softening. The hearing for the emergency custody petition is next week. Gerald's terrified. Does he have a lawyer? Legal aid assigned someone, but they're overwhelmed with cases. Frank's trying to find someone better. The recess bell rang, signaling students to line up. Rebecca watched as Ellie carefully coiled the jump rope and handed it back to Zoe with a shy smile. The classroom. The children worked on spelling practice while Rebecca circulated, offering help. When she reached Ellie's desk, she noticed the girl's handwriting had improved, the letters more confident, less hesitant. Beautiful work, Ellie, she praised softly. Ellie looked up, a small smile playing at her lips. I've been practicing with the books from the center. It was another small victory. Ellie voluntarily sharing information, initiating conversation. As the children packed up at day's end, Rebecca noticed Ellie suddenly freeze, her gaze fixed on the classroom window. Following her line of sight, Rebecca saw a sleek black car pulling into the school parking lot. Ellie, what's wrong? The child's face had gone pale. That's his car, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Before Rebecca could respond, the classroom door opened, and Mrs. Darlene appeared. Ready to go? Ellie? I've got good news, your uncle got the job. Ellie didn't move, her eyes still fixed on the window. Mrs. Darlene followed her gaze, immediately understanding. Rebecca, she said calmly, though her eyes conveyed urgency. Why don't you help Ellie gather her things while I speak with the office? As Mrs. Darlene left, Rebecca knelt beside Ellie's desk. It's all right, you're going with Mrs. Darlene, and you'll be safe. Ellie finally looked at her, fear evident in her wide eyes. He always finds us, she whispered. He said he always would. Not this time, Rebecca promised, helping Ellie with her backpack. This time is different because you're not alone anymore. Mrs. Darlene returned moments later with Frank, who had apparently been waiting in her car. His presence seemed to reassure Ellie slightly. We'll use the side exit, Frank said quietly. My car's right there. As Buo. They prepared to leave. Ellie suddenly turned and threw her arms around Rebecca's waist in a quick, fierce hug. Thank you, she whispered. And then she was gone, hurrying away with Mrs. Darlene and Frank. Through the window, Rebecca watched them exit the building and quickly get into Frank's car, not the usual one Mrs. Darlene drove. As they pulled away, the black car in the parking lot started its engine. Rebecca made a quick decision and walked briskly to the parking lot, positioning herself directly in the black car's path, pretending to search for something in her purse. The driver, a man she recognized from the community center, was forced to stop. For a long moment, their eyes met through the windshield. Rebecca did not move. By the time she finally stepped aside, Frank's car was long gone. Small victories indeed, she thought. Every single one of them matters. You're a teacher, not a social worker or a parent. Principal Warren's words were firm as he stood behind his desk. This situation with the Monroe family is becoming problematic. Rebecca maintained her composure despite the knot forming in her stomach. With respect, sir, I'm concerned about Ellie's well-being. Yesterday, her father, Mr. Bennett, the principal corrected, who has filed for legal custody and claims the child was wrongfully taken from him. He sighed, his expression softening slightly. Look, Rebecca, your dedication to your students is admirable, but there are boundaries. Mr. Bennett has complained about your interference and threatened legal action against the school. He was watching Ellie from the parking lot, Rebecca countered. She was terrified. He's her father. He has a right to see his child. Then why not come through proper channels? Sign in at the office? Meet with? You? Principal Warren had no immediate answer for that. The custody hearing is next week. Until then, I must insist you maintain professional distance. Focus on teaching Ellie, not on her family situation. Rebecca left the office feeling frustrated and increasingly worried. The principal wasn't wrong about boundaries, but he hadn't seen Ellie's face when she spotted that car. Later that morning, during art class, Rebecca noticed Ellie working intently on a drawing. Unlike her usual careful work, she was pressing the crayon so hard it occasionally tore the paper. When Rebecca gently asked what she was drawing, Ellie covered it with her arm. "It's private," she whispered. At recess, Rebecca found Zoe alone on the playground. "Where's Ellie?" she asked. "She said she didn't feel good," Zoe replied. "Her tummy hurts." Rebecca found Ellie in the nurse's office, curled on her side on the cot. "No fever," Nurse Helen said quietly. "But she's complained of stomach pain all morning. Could be anxiety. Can I talk to her for a minute?" Helen nodded and stepped away to give them privacy. "Ellie," Rebecca said softly, sitting beside the cot, "is your stomach really hurting? Or are you worried about something?" Ellie's eyes filled with tears. "Both," she admitted. "I saw him again this morning. Before school. His car was across from the bus stop." Rebecca's concern deepened. "Did he speak to you?" Ellie shook her head. "Uncle Gerald didn't see him. He was talking to Mrs. Perez about carpooling." She clutched her stomach. "It always hurts when I'm scared." "What are you scared might happen?" Rebecca asked gently. Ellie was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, "That he'll take me away and hurt Mom and Uncle. Gerald for hiding me." A tear slipped down her cheek. "And that I'll have to be quiet again, all the time." The raw fear in those simple words broke Rebecca's heart. Before she could respond, the door opened, and Principal Warren entered with a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. "Ms. Carter, this is Douglas Merrick, Mr. Bennett's attorney," the principal said stiffly. "He's requested a brief meeting with you." Rebecca stood, positioning herself between the men and Ellie. "This isn't an appropriate time or place. It concerns an urgent matter regarding Eleanor's welfare," Merrick stated, his voice smooth and authoritative. "We've received reports that you've been encouraging the child to make false statements about her father." "That's absolutely untrue," Rebecca replied firmly. "Nevertheless, we're preparing to add you to our filing as having undue influence." He was interrupted by a new voice from the doorway. "I believe Ms. Carter has made it clear this isn't an appropriate time for this discussion." Frank Williams stood there, his imposing figure filling the doorway, a visitor's badge clipped to his jacket. "And who might you be?" Merrick asked, his tone cooler. "Frank Williams. I'm here to pick up Ellie Monroe at her uncle's request." He handed a signed note to Principal Warren. He received a call that she wasn't feeling well. Principal Warren looked uncomfortable but nodded. "This appears to be in order. You have no authority to remove the child," Merrick began, but Frank cut him off. "Actually, Gerald Monroe is Ellie's legal guardian at present. Until a court says otherwise, he determines who may transport his niece." Frank's voice was calm but carried the authority of his years in law enforcement. "Unless you have a court order stating otherwise, which I'd be happy to review." Merrick's jaw tightened, but he produced no such document. "As I thought," Frank said. He turned to Ellie, his voice gentling. "Ready to go, kiddo? Your uncle's waiting at home." Ellie nodded, sliding off the cot and quickly moving to Frank's side. As far from Merrick as possible. As they left, Rebecca heard Merrick say to Principal Warren, "This will be noted in our filing." Later that afternoon, Rebecca was surprised to receive a call from Frank asking her to meet at the community center after school. When she arrived, she found not only Frank and Mrs. Darlene, but also a woman she didn't recognize. Tall, professionally dressed, with keen eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Rebecca, this is Marian Diaz," Mrs. Darlene introduced. "She's a family court attorney who's agreed to take Gerald's case pro bono. After speaking with Frank and reviewing the preliminary evidence, I'm concerned about this situation," Marian explained. "Particularly the pattern I'm seeing in Bennett's approach." "What pattern?" Rebecca asked. "Isolation, then discreditation," Marian replied. "First, he isolates his target, in this case Sarah, from support systems. Then, when she tries to leave, he uses her resulting vulnerability against her in court. It's unfortunately effective. But surely the court will see. Courts see evidence," Marian interrupted gently. "And Bennett is very good at presenting himself as the reasonable party while painting Sarah as unstable and Gerald as incompetent." "So what can we do?" Rebecca asked. "We need Ellie's perspective," Marian said. "But given her age, it's complicated. Children's testimony is handled very carefully in family court." "She's opening up more," Rebecca offered, "especially through music. She told me today that when she was with her father, she had to be quiet all the time." Marian made a note. "That's significant. Has she shown any other concerning behaviors?" Rebecca described Ellie's extreme startle response, her hoarding of food, her physical reactions to fear. "Classic anxiety responses," Marian murmured. "We'll request a child psychologist evaluation before the hearing." As they continued discussing strategy, Rebecca thought about Ellie's art project from that morning, the one she had hidden. What had she been drawing with such intensity? And what would happen at next? Weeks hearing that could change the trajectory of this small, brave girl's life forever? The weekend arrived with unexpected sunshine, a brief respite before the custody hearing scheduled for Tuesday. Rebecca found herself driving to Mrs. Darlene's house, where Ellie and Gerald were staying. Temporarily, a precaution Frank had suggested after the confrontation at school. Mrs. Darlene's cottage sat on the outskirts of Pine Hollow, surrounded by maple trees and a well-tended garden. As Rebecca parked, she spotted Ellie sitting on the porch swing, a small keyboard in her lap, alone from Mr. Jameson to help her practice. "Miss Carter!" Ellie's face brightened when she saw her teacher, the first truly uninhibited smile Rebecca had witnessed from the child. "Hello, sweetheart. That sounds beautiful," Rebecca said, hearing the simple melody Ellie had been playing. "Is that a new song?" Ellie nodded. "Mr. Jameson showed me how to play Twinkle Twinkle, and Mrs. Darlene says I can keep practicing inside if it rains." The screen door opened, and Mrs. Darlene emerged with a pitcher of lemonade. "Rebecca, what a lovely surprise. Join us?" As they settled on the porch, Rebecca noticed Gerald through the window, hunched over paperwork at the kitchen table. His face was drawn with worry. "How is he doing?" Rebecca asked quietly, while Ellie returned to her keyboard practice. Mrs. Darlene sighed. "Not well. He received another letter yesterday." She lowered her voice further. "Bennett's lawyers are demanding immediate custody transfer, claiming Gerald has been coaching Ellie to fear her father." "That's absurd," Rebecca whispered. "Ellie's fear is genuine. We know that, but it's our word against his, and Bennett has resources we don't." Mrs. Darlene glanced at Ellie with concern. "The poor child picks up on everything. Gerald tried to hide his reaction to the letter, but she knew something was wrong. Had stomach pains all night." Rebecca watched Ellie, whose small fingers moved carefully across the keyboard. Despite her apparent focus on the music, Rebecca could see tension in her posture, the way her shoulders hunched slightly as if expecting a blow. "Has Marian been able to contact Sarah?" Rebecca asked. "The hospital is being cautious about visitors. Apparently Bennett has been calling them daily, demanding updates on her condition. Mrs. Darlene's expression darkened. Frank thinks he's building a case that she's permanently unfit. A sudden gust of wind scattered fallen leaves across the porch, and in the distance, thunder rumbled, a storm approaching. Ellie's hands froze on the keyboard, her eyes widening at the sound. Just thunder, honey, Mrs. Darlene reassured her. We're safe here. Ellie nodded, but her fingers trembled as she set the keyboard aside. Would you like to show Ms. Carter your room? Mrs. Darlene suggested, clearly trying to distract her. You arranged your books so nicely. Ellie hesitated, then nodded, leading Rebecca inside. The guest room had been transformed with small, thoughtful touches. A colorful quilt, a bookshelf with the donated books arranged by size, and a stuffed rabbit on the pillow. Mrs. Darlene found Hoppy at the thrift store, Ellie explained, gently touching the rabbit's ear. She sewed his ear back on. It looks like a very cozy room, Rebecca said, noticing a drawing taped to the wall, the same one Ellie had been working on so intensely at school. Now Rebecca could see what it depicted, a small figure playing a piano, while larger figures watched from a distance, unable to reach her. Is that you playing music? Rebecca asked gently. Ellie nodded. Music makes the scared feelings smaller, she explained with simple wisdom. When I play, I can't hear the scary thoughts so loud. The profound insight from such a young child brought tears to Rebecca's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. Their moment was interrupted by raised voices from the kitchen. Gerald was on the phone, his tone agitated. You can't just, he was saying. That wasn't our agreement. As Rebecca and Ellie returned to the porch, Mrs. Darlene looked worried. That's the third call. Today, she murmured. Bennett's lawyers keep changing the terms. The thunder grew closer and raindrops began to fall, pattering on the roof. Like the approaching storm, Rebecca could feel the tension building, forces gathering beyond their control. What would Tuesday bring, and would any of them? Be ready for it? Monday morning dawned gray and misty, the kind of day that made Pine Hollow look like it was trapped in a dream. Rebecca's classroom felt unusually quiet without Ellie, who was staying home with Gerald to prepare for tomorrow's hearing. During lunch, Rebecca found herself staring at Ellie's empty seat, wondering how the child was coping with the looming court date. Her thoughts were interrupted by Zoe Chen's small voice. Is Ellie sick? She asked, concern evident in her dark eyes. No, she's just taking a special day with her family, Rebecca explained. Will she come back? Zoe persisted. Jessica said Ellie might go away forever. Rebecca felt a chill at those words. Where did Jessica hear that? Zoe shrugged. Her mom works at the courthouse. She said a fancy lawyer is trying to take Ellie away. News traveled fast in small towns, Rebecca thought grimly. After school, she drove directly to Mrs. Darlene's cottage, compelled by an urgency she couldn't explain. She found Ellie sitting at Mrs. Darlene's old upright piano, a surprise Rebecca hadn't noticed on her previous visit. The child was playing the same simple melody as before, but now with both hands, adding simple chords that Mr. Jameson must have taught her. That sounds wonderful, Rebecca said, genuinely impressed with Ellie's progress. Ellie turned, her face lighting up. Mrs. Darlene found it. It was her grandmother's. She said I could practice any time. Mrs. Darlene appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She's been playing for hours, she said with a fond smile. A natural talent. Where's Gerald? Rebecca asked quietly. Meeting with Marion, final preparations for tomorrow. Mrs. Darlene's smile faded. It's going to be difficult. As if sensing the adult's concern, Ellie's playing faltered. She turned on the piano bench, her small face suddenly serious. Do I have to talk to my father tomorrow? She asked directly. The question hung in the air. Rebecca and Mrs. Darlene exchanged glances, neither wanting to upset the child but unwilling to lie. The judge might ask you some questions, Mrs. Darlene finally explained. And your father will be there, but you won't be alone. Ellie's hands twisted in her lap. What if I can't talk? Sometimes when I'm scared, the words get stuck. Rebecca knelt beside the piano bench. That happens to a lot of people, Ellie. It's nothing to be ashamed of. But what if they think I'm lying or being bad? Ellie's voice dropped to a whisper. He always said no one would believe me anyway. The implication of those words sent a chill down Rebecca's spine. Ellie, she said carefully, would it be easier to show how you feel instead of saying it? The child looked confused. Through your music, Rebecca clarified. Sometimes when words are hard to find, music can speak for us. Something shifted in Ellie's expression, a flicker of hope. Like how different songs feel different, happy or sad or scared. Exactly, Rebecca said. What song feels like how you feel about staying with your uncle and Mrs. Darlene? Without hesitation, Ellie turned to the piano and played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, the simple melody flowing smoothly, her small face relaxed. And what music feels like before? Rebecca asked gently. Ellie's hands hovered over the keys, then pressed down in a discordant cluster of notes that jangled harshly. She played randomly, chaotically, the beautiful melody replaced by jarring sounds that made both adults wince. When she finished, she looked up at Rebecca, her eyes, asking, "Do you understand?" "I hear you," Rebecca said softly. "I really do." Later, as Mrs. Darlene walked Rebecca to her car, the older woman squeezed her hand. "You've built a bridge of trust with that child. Whatever happens tomorrow, that's a gift no one can take away." As Rebecca drove home, through the gathering dusk, she hoped that bridge would be strong enough to withstand the storm they all knew was coming. The courthouse stood in the center of Pine Hollow, its stone steps worn smooth by generations of footsteps. On Tuesday morning, Rebecca arrived early, surprised to find a small gathering already forming. Mrs. Peterson from the library, Mr. Jameson, the music teacher, and several parents from her class. "What are you all doing here?" she asked, touched by their presence. "Supporting Ellie," Mr. Jameson said simply. "The whole school knows something important is happening. Today." Inside, the hallway outside Family Courtroom B hummed with tense energy. Gerald sat on a bench, looking pale but determined in his one good suit. Beside him, Ellie wore a blue dress borrowed from the community center, her hair neatly braided by Mrs. Darlene, who sat on her other side. "Thank you for coming," Gerald said when he spotted Rebecca. "It means a lot to Ellie." The child didn't speak but reached for Rebecca's hand, holding it tightly. Marion Diaz approached, elegant in a charcoal suit, her expression confident despite the challenge ahead. "The judge has agreed to speak with Ellie in chambers rather than in open court," she explained quietly. "That's a good sign." Before Rebecca could respond, the atmosphere shifted. A group entered from the main doors, James Bennett, impeccable in an expensive suit, flanked by two attorneys including Douglas Merrick. Bennett's gaze immediately found Ellie, and he smiled, a perfect practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ellie's grip on Rebecca's hand tightened painfully. Frank appeared from a side hallway, positioning himself casually but deliberately between Bennett's group and Ellie. "Quite a turnout from town," he noted, loud enough for Bennett to hear. "Seems Ellie has made quite an impression on Pine Hollow." Bennett's smile faltered slightly as he noticed the growing number of community members filling the hallway. A court officer appeared at the doorway. "Monroe Bennett custody hearing," he announced. "Parties may enter." As they rose, Ellie tugged at Rebecca's hand. "You'll stay?" she whispered, fear evident in her voice. "I'll be right here," Rebecca promised. "And remember, if words get stuck, you have other ways to show how you feel." Ellie nodded solemnly, squaring her small shoulders as she walked beside her uncle toward the courtroom doors, where an uncertain future awaited. Behind them, the community of Pine Hollow followed, a united force gathering to protect one of their own. Family Courtroom B was smaller than Rebecca had imagined, with warm wood paneling and an American flag. Beside the judge's bench, Judge Martha Collins, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and attentive eyes, presided with a calm authority that seemed to quiet the room. Rebecca sat directly behind Gerald and Marion, close enough to see Ellie's small shoulders tense whenever her father's gaze turned toward her. Bennett sat with his attorneys at the opposite table, his posture relaxed and confident, occasionally nodding cordially to the judge. "This is an emergency custody hearing regarding Eleanor Bennett Monroe," Judge Collins began, reviewing the paperwork before her. "I see multiple petitions here, including Mr. Bennett's request for immediate custody transfer." The proceedings began with Bennett's attorney painting a compelling picture. A devoted father whose mentally unstable ex-partner had fled with his daughter, a successful professional who could provide stability, and advantages that an unemployed uncle in subsidized housing could not. When Gerald's turn came, Marion skillfully countered, presenting evidence of Ellie's improved health and emotional well-being since coming to Pine Hollow. School records showed academic progress, and medical reports documented her recovery from malnutrition and dehydration. "And we have numerous community witnesses," Marion continued, "who can testify to the positive environment Mr. Monroe has established for Ellie, despite limited resources." Throughout the morning, Rebecca watched Ellie, who sat perfectly still, her eyes downcast except when someone directly addressed her. The child's silence spoke volumes to Rebecca, who had seen her gradually becoming more animated at school and at Mrs. Darlene's house. During a brief recess, Rebecca approached Ellie in the hallway. "You're doing great," she encouraged. Softly, Ellie looked up, her eyes filled with worry. "He keeps looking at me," she whispered, "like he's trying to tell me something without talking." Before Rebecca could respond, a court officer approached. "The judge would like to speak with Eleanor in chambers now." Gerald knelt before his niece. "Remember what we practiced, Ellie? Just tell the truth about how you feel." Ellie nodded solemnly, then looked at Rebecca. "The music?" she whispered. "Right here," Rebecca replied, patting her bag where Mr. Jameson's small keyboard was safely tucked. They had arranged for it to be brought to the judge's chambers if needed. As Ellie walked away with the court officer, Gerald turned to Rebecca, his face etched with worry. What if she freezes up? Bennett has always intimidated her into silence. "She won't be alone," Rebecca assured him, though her own heart raced with concern. The wait seemed endless. In the hallway, the Pine Hollow contingent had grown. Teachers, parents, even Principal Warren had arrived, setting aside his previous caution after witnessing Bennett's demeanor in court. Finally, the door to the chambers opened. The court officer emerged first, followed by Ellie, whose face was flushed but composed. Judge Collins appeared in the doorway behind them, her expression thoughtful as she watched Ellie return to her uncle's side. As they re-entered the courtroom, an unexpected figure appeared at the back door. A thin woman with Ellie's same delicate features, though her face was lined with strain and her movements hesitant. She was accompanied by a professional-looking woman who whispered briefly to Marion. "Your Honor," Marion addressed the court, "Sarah Monroe has been released from Lakeside Behavioral Health and wishes to join these proceedings." Murmur ran through the courtroom. Bennett's posture stiffened visibly, his confident expression faltering for the first time. Ellie turned, her eyes widening. "Mom," she whispered, the word carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. Judge Collins surveyed the courtroom, taking in the new arrival, the community members filling the seats, and finally, Ellie's face, which had transformed at the sight of her mother. "This case has taken an unexpected turn," the judge noted. "We'll reconvene after lunch to hear from Ms. Monroe and to make final determinations." As the court adjourned, Rebecca caught Ellie's eye across the crowded room. The child gave a small but distinct nod, a silent message between them. Whatever happened next, Ellie had found her voice in one form or another. Outside, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, mirroring the tension building within the courthouse walls. The afternoon session began with a palpable tension in the air. Sarah Monroe sat beside Gerald, her hands trembling slightly but her gaze steady. She had embraced Ellie during the lunch break, their reunion a moment of quiet intensity that brought tears to many observers' eyes. Judge Collins addressed the court with renewed focus. I've heard testimony regarding Eleanor's living situation with her uncle. I've spoken privately with the child. Now, I'd like to hear from Ms. Monroe regarding her perspective on this custody matter." Sarah approached the witness stand, her voice soft but surprisingly clear as she was sworn in. Unlike her brother's worn suit, she wore simple hospital-issued clothing, making Bennett's expensive attire seem almost ostentatious by comparison. "Ms. Monroe," Marion began gently, "could you explain why you left your marriage and moved with Ellie to multiple locations?" "Over the past 3 years?" Sarah's hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I was afraid," she said simply. "James controlled every aspect of our lives. What we wore, who we spoke to, when we could leave the house. When I tried to express independent thoughts, he would—" She paused, glancing at Ellie, "He would explain why I was wrong, for hours, until I agreed with him." "Objection," Bennett's attorney interjected. "Ms. Monroe has been under psychiatric care. Her perception of events is questionable at best. I was hospitalized because I couldn't sleep for days, terrified he would find us." "Again," Sarah countered, a flash of strength emerging. "The doctor called it situational anxiety and depression, not delusion." The testimony continued, Sarah describing a pattern of isolation and psychological pressure that had become unbearable. When Bennett took the stand afterward, he portrayed himself as a concerned father, bewildered by his ex-wife's irrational behavior, painting her mental health challenges as the root of all problems. Throughout their testimonies, Rebecca watched Ellie, who sat between Mrs. Darlene and Gerald, her face increasingly troubled as the adults spoke about her as if she weren't present. When the final arguments concluded, Judge Collins looked directly at Ellie. "Eleanor, is there anything you'd like to tell the court before I make my decision?" The courtroom fell silent. Ellie looked at her father, then her mother, then down at her hands. She began, but her voice faltered. The familiar pattern of silence seemed to be repeating itself. Rebecca caught her eye and gave an encouraging nod. Ellie straightened her shoulders and turned to the judge. "I can't explain it with words," she said finally, "but I can show you, if that's allowed." Judge Collins looked intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" "Music," Ellie said. "Ms. Carter brought the keyboard. I can play how I feel." After a moment's consideration, Judge Collins nodded. "I'd like to hear that." Rebecca brought forward the small keyboard, placing it on the table. Before Ellie, the child took a deep breath, positioned her fingers, and began to play. First came a simple, happy melody when she looked at her mother, Gerald, and Mrs. Darlene. The notes were clear and bright, like sunshine after rain. Then, as her gaze shifted toward her father, the music changed. Dramatically, becoming discordant, chaotic, with jarring low notes that made several people wince. Finally, she played a new melody, one Rebecca hadn't heard before, tentative at first, then gradually stronger, resolving into something that wasn't quite happy, but carried hope within its notes. When she finished, the courtroom remained absolutely silent. Even Bennett seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Judge Collins studied Ellie thoughtfully. "That was very clear, Eleanor. Clearer than many adult testimonies I've heard." She turned to address the entire court. "I'll render my decision shortly." As they waited for the judge's return, Rebecca noticed something remarkable. Ellie had moved to sit between her mother and uncle, no longer hunched and silent, but sitting straight, occasionally whispering to them both. The transformation was subtle but profound. This was a child finding her strength. When Judge Collins returned, her decision reflected that same recognition. "In matters of family court, the best interest of the child must always prevail," she began. "Based on all evidence presented, including Eleanor's own compelling expression of her feelings, I am denying Mr. Bennett's petition for emergency custody." A collective exhale seemed to pass through the Pine Hollow supporters. "Instead," the judge continued, "I am establishing a temporary guardianship arrangement where Eleanor will remain with her uncle Gerald Monroe, with regular visitation with her mother as her treatment progresses." She fixed Bennett with a stern gaze. Mr. Bennett will be granted supervised visitation only, pending completion of a court-mandated psychological evaluation and parenting classes. Bennett's face darkened with barely controlled anger, but his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm. Furthermore, Judge Collins concluded, I'm issuing a protective order requiring Mr. Bennett to maintain a respectful distance from Eleanor's home and school. As the court adjourned, Ellie stood between her mother and uncle, a small figure no longer diminished by fear. When she spotted Rebecca, she offered a smile that transformed her entire face. Not the cautious, guarded expression of before, but the unreserved smile of a child who perhaps for the first time felt truly safe. Outside the courthouse, the gathering storm clouds had finally broken, giving way to unexpected sunshine. The spring concert at Pine Hollow Elementary filled the gymnasium with proud parents and community members. 6 months had passed since the courthouse hearing, bringing changes both subtle and profound to Ellie Monroe's life. Rebecca stood at the side of the makeshift stage, watching her. Students prepare for their performances. Her gaze settled on Ellie, no longer the frightened child who had arrived with cracked lips and haunted eyes. Today, Ellie wore a simple blue dress, her hair neatly braided, her cheeks carrying a healthy glow that spoke of proper nutrition and peaceful sleep. Nervous? Rebecca asked, approaching as Ellie practiced finger positions for her upcoming piano piece. A little, Ellie admitted with a small smile, but the good kind of nervous. In the audience, Rebecca could see Gerald, now employed full-time at the hardware store and taking night classes to become a store manager. Beside him sat Sarah, still thin but steadier now, her eyes clear and focused as she chatted with Mrs. Darlene. The protective order against Bennett remained in place, his supervised visitations having grown increasingly infrequent as he'd thrown himself back into his corporate career in Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, Principal Warren announced, please welcome our special soloist, Ellie Monroe, performing Morning Light, an original composition. A hush fell over the gymnasium as Ellie approached the piano. Her hands trembled slightly as she positioned them over the keys, but her gaze was steady as she looked out at the audience, at the community that had become her safety net. The melody that flowed from her small fingers started softly, like dawn breaking over Pine Hollow's hills. It carried echoes of her past, brief moments of dissonance that resolved into clarity, shadows giving way to light. As the piece progressed, it gathered strength and confidence, just as Ellie herself had done. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, remembering the girl who once couldn't speak her fears aloud, who now expressed herself so eloquently through music. Some wounds, some would take longer to heal, but the journey had begun. When Ellie finished playing, she stood and gave a small, graceful bow. The audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks while Gerald beamed with unconcealed pride. After the concert, as families mingled and congratulated the performers, Ellie approached Rebecca holding a small bouquet of spring flowers. These are for you, she said, her voice clear and confident. Thank you for helping me find my voice. Rebecca knelt to accept the flowers, struck by how much taller Ellie seemed now, not just in physical height but in spirit. You always had a voice, Ellie, she replied softly. You just needed someone to listen. As they joined the others outside in the spring sunshine, Rebecca watched Ellie walk between her mother and uncle, no longer hiding or hunching her shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. Healing rarely followed a straight path, but Ellie now moved forward with a community behind her and music within her. Sometimes the most profound transformations began with the simplest acts. A teacher noticing a child's cracked lips, a community opening its arms, a small girl finding the courage to play her truth when words failed. And sometimes, Rebecca thought as she watched Ellie laugh at something Mrs. Darlene said, that was more than enough.